Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Time for a Telecom Rehab webinar. I'm Judy Arnold, a product marketer with Cinch, and I'll get our webinar started by outlining the agenda, introducing our speakers, and kicking off the conversation. We do not have plans to pepper you with PowerPoint, but we want to have you hear directly from our client, Chris Patterson, so you can hear his story and learn from his experience. Our focus today is on overcoming communication challenges stemming from a dramatic growth and acquisition strategy. That presents a unique challenge in healthcare and for any industries concerned about privacy and security. Before we start, just a reminder that all guest cameras are turned off and microphones, but we do welcome your questions. So please use the question widget to enter your questions at any time, and we'll cover those at the end. We're going to get started just with a quick look at the agenda. We're going to start with introductions, and after that, a few brief notes about key industry trends, and then we will hear the Florida Orthopedic Institute story. We want you to walk away with 4 key learnings: how to cost effectively scale and do it securely as well, how to increase quality, improve efficiency, and enhance employee and customer experience. And as I mentioned, we will then wrap up with a question and answer period. To introduce our panel, Chris Patterson is responsible for the technical operations of Florida Orthopedic Institute, its managed practices and surgery centers, and is also the HIPAA security officer. Ricardo Ordonez is the real-time communications practice manager for Synoptek, a global systems integrator and managed IT services provider. Miles Feinberg leads business development and growth in the Southeast region for Synoptek. And Kent Caldwell is a voice solutions architect working with partners and enterprise clients with Cinch, offering personalized cloud communications across voice, messaging, video, and email. Let's take a moment and look at the current state of the world. Not surprisingly, the lines between voice calls and meetings, mobile and Wi-Fi networks, mobile and desktop devices, and office and field settings are going to continue to blur. And I think that Microsoft puts it really well by coining it the promise of organizational mobility. So how are organizations dealing with this challenge of organizational mobility and communicating with employees and customers across all these different environments? Well, Microsoft Teams has emerged as the market's best collaboration tool and one of the fastest growing apps. During the pandemic, it increased 894% in growth. That translates into about 1 million companies in North America using Office 365 and half of their users using Teams. On a monthly basis, that's over 270 million monthly active Teams users. And as many of us have experienced, that also translated into a lot more weekly meetings over audio and video, 252% increase in weekly meetings for most Teams users. And in addition to audio and voice, chat also boomed with a 32% increase in weekly chats by average team users. So that leads us to the story of Florida Orthopedic, who incorporated Teams as one of their solutions. So let's stop the slides and let's have all of our panelists turn their cameras on and start our conversation and hear more about this story. So welcome all of you. Thank you for your time. Chris, good to have you. Can you get us started by telling us a bit about Florida Orthopedic, the organization, what you do, the geographic region, and your growth strategy?
You bet, Judy. Thank you again. Florida Orthopedic really started small. We started here in the Tampa Bay about 30 years ago with a small private practice. Through natural growth, they grew to be one of the dominant players here in the Tampa Bay area. Their goals haven't changed, and they want to continue to grow. And they've adopted a M&A strategy, mergers and acquisitions, to continue that growth paradigm as we look to the next few years. So that really kicked off about 2 years ago, really in line with COVID, unfortunately, when we started merging with other practices and acquiring other practices. And through that, we saw a huge amount of growth that brought in a new slew of problems that we really weren't prepared for. One of them being this communications problem that we're here to talk about today.
Right. One of the things you and I've talked about is the fact that the disparate systems with all of these acquisitions was a challenge. Talk a little bit about that impact.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, 100 doctors, getting them on one system is definitely difficult. But as you start bringing in another 100 doctors on 5 different systems, those really expound for the problems. And what we had was a on-premise phone system that had a significant amount of limitations when it came to mobile calling and things along that nature. Once we started having that work from home strategy that COVID brought everyone, we really started seeing where our phone system was really starting to burst at the seams. Putting a handset out for every user is a significant investment. And then tying a VPN back into your corporate network presents a slew of security challenges. So we started looking at solutions that could solve our challenges, but we also wanted to be able to take these other organizations that had maybe a UCaaS phone system, maybe an on-prem phone system, whatever they had, and bring them into ours, because the doctors will collaborate between the teams. We'll need to transfer patients on scheduling, things along those natures. So we really needed a cohesive strategy throughout the organization. And that's where we kind of picked up the team's atmosphere as being, that collaborative opportunity for us.
What did you try initially that worked well or didn't work well?
Well, initially, we looked at a number of different options. Kent Caldwell here from Cinch helped us out in installing a small UCaaS system to pilot in one of our environments. It works really well for them while they were struggling through some phone challenges, and we were still adopting our strategy. But we could see that it wasn't going to scale to the size that we needed it to, and it wasn't going to have quite all the tie-ins that we were looking for, especially in the customability range. So we went back to him and said, what other options do you have? And he introduced us a little bit to the team's environment and what he was doing on a couple of different projects with some larger organizations than us that maybe had full staffed IT and things. And at that point, the technology was newer, but we really didn't have that tie-in that we were looking for. So we went with a partner, a different partner that we could bring in to provide us more of that smaller level of service. But that brought in its own challenges. And what we really wanted was that perfect phone underlaying network that Kent had with Cinch, and we wanted to overlay that with all the features of Microsoft Teams.
Thank you. Kent, can you expand on that a little bit? I know when Chris came to you, what your thoughts were about how you could help, and what other recommendations did you?
Yeah, sure. Chris was the, like most directors of IT in the healthcare space, he was running extremely hot. He was in the middle of more than what he was just talking about. He was also converting an MPLS network to SD-WAN. He was looking at ramping up and improving his security measures. And also with all this M&A, when disparaging systems, he also had a contact center that he needed to upgrade as well. So he had quite a bit on his plate. We were looking initially just to provide him the SIP trunks that he spoke about with his existing, IP prem-based PBXs. So we could kind of check off the boxes. He needed a tier 1 provider. That was the preference. He wanted somebody that was HIPAA compliant and that could provide the diversity and availability that he required from the business. So we set up some trunks and we kind of checked all those boxes, and it went really, really well. And then he kind of shared his, his end state. He wanted to go to a hosted voice solution. And that's when he went with the first provider. It kind of had a little bit of issues. He shared those issues with me. And then I had worked previously with Miles and Ricardo and Synoptek on a couple of other opportunities that fell, kind of dovetailed exactly what Chris was trying to do. And so that's where I kind of made those introductions to him. I said, hey, we've got the highway that checks all your boxes. We're a certified direct routing operator connect, dynamic E911, Microsoft partner, but we couldn't provide the pre and post sale support that Chris and the best practices that Chris really needed. And I knew Synoptek could. And that's how kind of our genesis of our conversation went, and then the introduction to Synoptek.
So Chris, where did you go from there? What were your next steps to deal with all of these issues of the systems and scalability and control and other communications challenges?
Yeah, so just stepping back just a little bit to what Kent alluded to there, are those challenges that we ran into. And, with our partner that we brought in, while they could provide that connection to the Microsoft Teams environment, what we found was they required us to host all of our Office licensing with them in order for them to manage their relationship with Microsoft. That became a big problem because we're a larger organization. They were used to working with smaller organizations, and we had an EA agreement with Microsoft that one, we couldn't break, but two, if we did, it would cost us significantly more to work out of that scenario. So what we ended up with was this process where we had to take a ticket to our vendor. They would troubleshoot it, say, nope, this is a Microsoft problem. Take it to Microsoft. And they would say, hey, we need more information about this call, talk to your vendor. And, 2-3 days would go by as we shuffled back and forth because there was not that back-end link that we needed between those two systems. So that was, the biggest thing, but there was also other things. There was, the lack of functionality that we would need in areas like call recording and areas like analytics and breaking out teams. Plus, we just needed a lot of help in customizing the system. And so, when Kent brought up Synoptek and some of the great work that they had done, we said, let's move from this other vendor. Let's try Synoptek and see what options they have, and even just in the pre-sales process, they were able to help us out with so much of our deployment problems, and it's just gone so well since then.
That's great. And Miles, so talk a little bit about how when Chris reached out, what were some of the things that you did to step in and help him fill those gaps?
Sure, thanks, Judy. And as Chris mentioned here, it's really about understanding their needs. At Synoptek, we don't believe there's a one size fits all for anyone. Every organization has unique needs. You heard Chris talk about wanting to keep the licensing, the Microsoft licensing as it was, but still have complete advice, support on licensing, end-to-end support, understanding that there's other vendors who make those requirements to purchase a license from them or transition, but we don't require that. Obviously, the cinch, the quality of the network was really important. Chris was already familiar. We had a relationship with Cinch already, running over Cinch. Obviously delivered that. Important to have full integration with Five9 as a contact center, which we did seamlessly, cost effectively. And speaking of costs, the usage model is that most users across, Florida Orthopedic are not necessarily using really telephony all that much, which is common these days. You have some heavy users in different departments, so they wanted a cost model that really made sense rather than a fixed price per user for every user,
Right.
which we accommodated that. The speedy support with staff that have expertise on Teams and Teams telephony, and we're a global managed service provider with an emphasis on service, so we really excelled in delivering that white glove managed Teams experience. And then just lastly, Chris mentioned some of these things like the ability to have call recording, but with HIPAA compliance, being set up to operate inside their own tenant with their own safeguards around that, having a dashboard of analytics to really drill down to visually see what's going on and to see what's going on in the entire system was really important. So these are just some of the many things that we provided.
That's great. And you talked about Teams, so I wanted to step back for 1 minute and go to Ricardo. Microsoft Teams does have a phone system, but what does it provide? You know, what features does it provide? What's missing? Help everyone understand a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, it's a complete phone system. It excels in areas where remote collaboration, so remote workforce, that's because Teams uses a different protocol than a traditional SIP UCaaS provider. It uses TLS. It outperforms SIP, especially when the network's not controlled. From a feature functionality standpoint, it's very, very robust. You know, you can do hold, call part transfer, consultant transfer. You can do conference calls with 250 participants at a time. You can record calls, you can transcribe calls, you can live caption calls. And you know, it's going to be a very, very robust and sophisticated and elegant tool, but it does have still some deficiencies. The key one being reporting. The problem with the reporting in Teams is there's really 3 problems with it. Number one, you have to access the Teams admin center for reporting. So you're not going to necessarily want to give a user in the environment access to the admin center. You might reserve that for IT staff. And so if you have a sales manager that wants a report, he's going to have to leverage the IT department to pull that report for him because he needs access to the Teams admin center and he won't have it, for example, he or she. The second problem is it only does ad hoc reporting. So if you want to schedule a report, hey, I want to know the phone activity for the prior week every Monday, that IT person is going to have to go in and manually run the report for that manager because it won't automate it. And then the third thing that's a problem with it is Microsoft's controlling which metrics it deems are significant. And so you have this narrow scope of metrics that you can see. And they all have to do with productivity, like, you know, how many conference calls did they schedule, how many were ad hoc, how many were repeating, et cetera, how many one-on-one calls, video calls. And so Microsoft's solution to this problem is Power BI. Go get a Power BI license, go build Power BI results, reports. Power BI will integrate natively with the Teams admin center, but that's arduous. It's not easy for everybody. And so we have our own enhanced reporting tool that basically solves for all those problems. You don't have to access the Teams admin center. It's a different portal. You can schedule reports. You can schedule them to go at any cadence you want, you know, with multiple distribution types and formats. And then the third thing is it goes from maybe 20 or 30 metrics, it goes to hundreds of metrics. And so that's the enhanced reporting and the analytics that Chris and Miles were talking about. And then, you know, Teams has very, very sophisticated call routing capabilities. So like, thank you for calling for sales, press 1, how you route and distribute calls. It does that very, very well. It's quasi contact center-ish, but the reporting is deficient there as well. So depending on your reporting needs, you'll have problems with that. So we do have a bridge that has real-time queue analytics. So you can see how many callers are in the queue, how many agents are available. And then the third thing is call recording. You can record calls ad hoc on Teams, but this tool allows you to have like an always on. So you can say these users in the environment are always being recorded. You can have a message that appears, you know, that tells the caller they're being recorded. You can establish your own retention policy. How long do you want to have a 30-day rolling, 60-day rolling? You can exclude from the call logs, from the retention policy. You can actively listen on the call. You can tag notes on the call. And then there's SMS. We have our own SMS product. So SMS is usually one that also people want and need, and you can't necessarily get a great solution with Teams. And so those are probably the 2 big things: reporting and then texting.
And what are the licensing requirements with the Teams phone?
So you can always make a call Teams to Teams anywhere globally for free. The licensing that you need to enable a dial pad to dial somebody's, say, office line, landline, mobile number, it's called Microsoft 365 phone system. It's an add-on license. It's generally $8 unless you're a nonprofit or you're in education. Then they have very, very, very competitive pricing. It's not free, but it's close to free. And so you need that license that enables the dial pad. The only caveat to that is if you're already on an E5, then that E5 bundle includes phone system. So if you have an E5 license, you're already paying for the phone system. If you're not using Teams as your phone system, you're paying for that feature functionality twice, once to Microsoft and then once to whatever your provider is. The other thing is if you are an organization that wants E5, but you find it expensive and it's very, very attractive because of the security aspects to it, by repositioning your IT budget and telephony back into Microsoft Teams, Microsoft ecosystem, you whittle the gap to go from E3 to E5. Now, instead of being a $20 per user delta, maybe it's now 6 or 7. So there's some benefits with maybe reallocating spend kind of a little smarter in the tenant.
That's great. And when it comes to the direct routing, another thing I wanted to touch on is, the security concerns, and we're going to get back to that with you, Chris, in a minute. But Kent, I know that emergency calling is important to consider when your calls are routing through Teams. So can you talk about that service and how you're supporting Florida Orthopedic?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like I stated earlier, we're a certified dynamic E911 partner with Microsoft Teams. I live in Tampa, and I've been a patient of Florida Orthopedic. I'm old, I've had shoulders, elbows, had plenty of surgeries. So when I'm actually meeting my doctor, there's quite a few offices here in town. I might be meeting him in one side of town versus the other. The nice thing about that E911, it follows that doctor or the staff from one office to the next via their PC. So that was definitely a box that Chris wanted to tick off, and we were able to provide.
That's great. Chris, so we talked about a lot of the benefits of these solutions. Why did Teams and direct routing make sense for you? Why was that a good solution? Any other reasons to add?
They've hit so many of them, but the fact that we had Microsoft licensing and Microsoft is really poised to be a great player in the space, because you're going to use them for Office most likely as a company. And once you use them for Office, then you're going to use them for email. And once you use them for email, then start looking at their security products, because their protection, malware protection, everything like that is first class. And then on top of that, their data loss protection and all those policies and things like that come on top of it. All of a sudden, you find yourself in an E5 license, right? And really, for the value that it is, it's already a cost savings over what you're doing today. So once you're in that environment, now that phone system, like Ricardo said, is just an extra cost that you're paying somebody else duplicative. So for us, that brought down the expense of transitioning to a new phone system by 50%, because we didn't have to duplicate that cost anymore. And many of the replacement systems that we looked at that had kind of this full communication telephony platform, were twice as expensive as our transition to Teams. Wow. And that made a huge difference for us. On top of that, like Kent alluded to, we had to have that 911 follow our doctors. They see multiple clinics, they're in surgery at multiple places, they may call patients from home, all these different things, but we've got to know where they're at, and if they do need to call 911, then we need that call to go to the right spot for them. So that was a big process for us for that. But I think the most important thing for us was adoption. How do you get somebody to a new phone system effectively? How do you get them there with the least amount of pain? Because it's always going to be tough to make a change like this. And how do you get your shareholders, which for us as physicians, to buy into making this change? And for that, you have to show them some value, right? It can't just be this is better for you because of money, although that's a great decision. It's got to be something else. And so what we were able to give the physicians was, now their cell phone becomes an extension of Teams, and they can call a patient from their cell phone. That phone number is automatically masked to our main number. No longer do they have patients texting them back because they accidentally called them from their cell phone and things like that. And if a patient texts them and all of a sudden they get into exchange, now their phone gets lost and we've got a HIPAA problem. There's so many different avenues there that things can go wrong. So we wanted to show them, let's keep you in this environment. Let's give you direct contact to your secretary at any time. You can just transfer the call to them and things like that, no matter where your secretary is at today, and things along that nature. We wanted to be able to route voicemails to a team group rather than, that individual person that we had to before. And Synoptek was able to help us in designing an overall strategy to make it to where the message comes into a route point, and if nobody answers it, then it goes to a group SharePoint. From there, you can do so many things. You can automate so much, and that was really a benefit that we could show the providers and all of our executives. So once we started showing that, people got really excited, and because we went with that direct routing option, we had so many different ways that we could pull it all together pain-free. with direct routing, they have an SBC that sits out there, and we tied that into our existing phone system. We were able to move all of our phone lines over, and nobody even noticed that we did anything. And so now we're still operating on our own old phone system, but we're operating under the Synoptek phone lines provided through Cinch. Immediately, all of our dropped calls, things like that went away. And, people were like, oh, we've already upgraded our phone system. But, that was just phase one. We started bringing in, all this different technology and stuff on top of that, and just keep providing value over and over again. And that gets people excited. So, from there, we brought in our call center, 5 nines. Synoptek, again, with that SBC, can now route a call over to that call center, route a call over to Teams, or route a call over to our legacy phone system for users that hadn't transitioned yet. And that made the whole thing very seamless to the end user. They didn't have to go learn everything day one. They could learn it all in piecemeal. And because they were already using Teams for all their meeting calls during COVID, they were already using Teams to chat back and forth with each other. They felt very comfortable in the environment, and the transition didn't feel like you're getting a new product. It felt like you're getting an upgrade to an existing product.
That's great. And you alluded to a lot of customization. And Miles, I wanted to go to you for a minute to just talk about how critical it was for Florida Orthopedic to be able to customize to make this a successful transition. Are there other customizations that they might not yet have implemented that listeners might think about as they begin their journey? Other suggestions or other future thoughts?
Yeah, Judy, it's interesting. I rarely find an organization that wants to adopt Teams telephony that doesn't have some customization requirements. So Chris,
Right.
while there was a number of different solutions that they use, that's not uncommon. And, some examples of that, like an IVR system, where you have press 1 for this, press 2 for that. That needs to be integrated with telephony, obviously. Some of the organizations we deal with have need overhead paging, like they have a warehouse, they want to make a broadcast announcement. Ricardo mentioned SMS. A lot of organizations, actually in healthcare, often have like an eFax. They still use fax, and eFax integration. Some organizations want their existing legacy phone system, at least temporarily, to coexist. Maybe there's some phasing in and a transition period. We've solved for that. Chris at Florida Ortho, they have a contact center integration, but a lot of organizations have other applications, in different realms, like CRM solutions, like Salesforce or Dynamics, and they want to maybe initiate calls while someone's in the CRM, or maybe ingest the call recordings or transcripts back into the customer record. And there could be many other, applications, obviously, you might want to integrate with. For that reason, while we've built out these most common integrations, we're regularly uncovering new ones periodically, right? That is a need we haven't encountered before. So for that reason, we have a dev team that's experienced in building out new ones. But we have pretty good, strong stockpile of intellectual property, because it's just so often that you need these customizations.
Thanks, Miles. And Chris, one of the things I wanted to talk about is the results you're seeing. So you did talk about the savings, which is fantastic. So what other results can you share about being cost effective, scalability, even quality, customer feedback, those kinds of things?
Yeah, first off, from the top, I'm a director, so the first thing I think of is, how can I reduce the burden on my employees? Management's got to be easy on this thing. Having a partner with Synoptek lets us push a lot of that off to them that we were handling on our own, since we had an on-prem phone system, or paying through the nose to get a vendor out to work on and things like that. And that part became so much simpler with Teams. Not troubleshooting with a carrier is another huge one. And between those two alone, we were able to reduce half an FTE and reassign that to new, kind of burgeoning projects and things like that. That became even more important as we got into M&A, because we had a full FTE devoted to phone system maintenance and running things that we didn't have to do because now everything became inclusive in working in the teams. So for my department, that made the most sense. For all the others, bringing those secretaries, those voicemails in a collaborative effort, in a typical doctor's office, that one secretary has to handle basically everything from a doctor, but they've got medical assistants and things like that. But when you've got one voicemail to check, that goes to that one person, and she's got to get to it, or he's got to get to it, and it makes for a bottleneck. But now that we can collaborate and share it, and the supervisors can see exactly how underwater those secretaries are, can monitor it with the analytics, can listen in to call recordings and hear the frustrations if need be, and things like that. All those things make it a much more efficient for the practice, which makes a huge ordeal. And then lastly, I mean, there's so many of them, I don't want to touch them all, but lastly, the physician side, right? And physicians need to communicate with patients. They're going to, they need to call that patient and give them the results in person at times. They need to, listen to the feedback from the patient outside of the office. And when they can call that patient and mask that phone, have that secure method of communication with them, and be able to tie in things on top of it, that's where the real value comes to them. They can, in the same app, message their secretary while they're talking with a patient, get details, and now they can act like they remember everything about that patient's visit because they got somebody on the back end working with them. And keeping that all inclusive into one system really makes a huge difference for them.
And so they were no problems hopping on board in doing that.
There was apprehension, don't get me wrong,
Okay.
but as soon as we got one or two moved over, then it was like, they started talking to each other. They started saying, listen, all my woes are resolved. I no longer drop calls. I no longer lose a call because my secretary doesn't know what happened to it, or something along those lines. And once you get a few of those win cases, then the rest of them really want to get on board quick. And we had doctors coming to us, which, for us, usually it's pulling teeth, but we had doctors coming to us to actually make the transition. And that was just a huge success story in and of itself.
That's wonderful. And that touches on, again, the issue that we've talked about, security and patient care. I know, Kent, you and Chris have talked about some other things when it comes to HIPAA compliance going forward for the future. What other challenges are there that you might be working on to solve?
Yeah, we're kind of piggybacking on what Chris just stated. Since we're a full-blown CPaaS provider, right? So we can provide voice, messaging, faxing, and email. So Chris and his team, they're looking for a way to communicate down to those patients like myself. They want to be able to send out and gain secure surgical authorizations. So obviously the phone call that's kind of been hit and miss with the success rate there. So we're now looking, we can provide a HIPAA PHI compliant email solution that they can send out to these patients and gain that surgical authorization that they're looking for, and also be able to communicate down to them, hey, it's surgery tomorrow, remember not to eat for 24 hours and different, communications like that. But so that's some of the other things that we're working with him that, again, check that HIPAA and the PHI compliancy that they desperately need.
That's
great. Really all you can do as a practice, all you can do is find those partners that really make you successful, right? We can't do it all our own. We're not going to have the staff to design a phone system. We're not going to have the staff to work with, an underlying network carrier. Being able to rely on one of the top tier of phone connectivity with Cinch, and underlying that, that perfect road to lay down your framework on, and then partnering with Microsoft to provide a UI, which is the skills that they have, gives you those two mammoths that make a great product. And then you've got to have that glue in between, right? You got to have Synoptek there to manage that relationship on both sides. You've got to have them there because they know everything about your environment, and they can jump on a call, and they've got the developers and things ready to make those customizations. And that's what makes this whole thing a win, is by taking, those two behemoths and putting that glue in the middle to make it all work together.
Well, Chris, I know this didn't all happen overnight, and there was trial and error. When you look back with what you know now, would you have done things any differently?
Yeah, there's always things that you're going to change, but as far as once we got onto the Synoptek and Cinch bandwagon here, things went so smoothly that there was nothing I would change. Now, I wouldn't try to do it myself if I did it again, because that was my first try. I wouldn't work with that small partner who has one or two options and a cookie cutter method, because that's a failure for us as well. And instead you've got to find that partner that can give you that level of customization that you need. Maybe you're just a straight Operator Connect user. Maybe you want somebody to manage all your licenses, and maybe you want somebody who can customize every facet of the operation. And once we found the partner here with Synoptek and Cinch, that really made it that we could choose any of those that made sense for us.
So, it's really helpful to hear that story, and I'm glad it's working for you. We talked about, saving money with the existing licenses, scaling cost effectively, the success and security and reliability with the Cinch network, as well as being able to lean on Synoptek for the customizations and the implementation and support. And, really importantly, getting the providers and employees on board, reducing that risk with your messaging, and having the secure communications. Is there anything else you can think of as kind of a lesson learned out of this story, something we didn't touch on that you might want to add for those listening before we move on to some Q&A?
Yeah, you just don't know what you don't know when you come into these things. And what we saw right off the bat with Synoptek was they sat down and looked at our overall strategy and developed a roadmap for us to say, these are all the features that you could do. Do you need this? And we were like, oh, call recording. We never even thought about that portion of it, and those are the things that you miss when you try to do these things by yourself. So while all those options are available, finding that partner is the way to go. But yeah, the feature sets alone are just impossible to know all of it, right? So get that partner that can sort through that whole mess with you, and then challenge them on customizations. Challenge them instead of what the system is designed to do to what you want to do, because oftentimes they have the development skills and things like that on the back end to really make it work, and sometimes incredibly cost effectively, that then you can get those ROI results that you need, and get a better user adoption because they're excited about the product shift.
Thanks. If anybody else wants to add anything, feel free. If not, I'm going to ask Bill, who's our teammate behind the scenes, fielding questions from the audience, if we've got any questions.
Well, I think we covered the one that came in, and it was for Chris. You mentioned you had a prior solution, and what was the experience like to change to Cinch with Synoptek? But I think you've covered that, and you've said it's a pretty seamless experience. You were able to onboard very well. Did you have any downtime at all going from a prior solution to this one?
Well, because we had that direct routing option and we put that SBC in the back, we were able to have zero downtime. So porting the numbers, which is always the hardest part of this whole process, and that's the time that you're going to have that downtime, is you're working with a carrier who doesn't want to lose you, and they don't have any incentive to help you during this process. So for us, it took multiple efforts to get all of our numbers back from those carriers that we were moving away from. But since we had that direct routing option, we were able to take our time, get that right, get all those numbers in the system, and still point them back to our old phone system, eliminating all those downtimes that we could have had on that environment. Once we got everything in place, the actual move over is very simple. To move an employee, most of the time it was as simple as going into my old phone system, typing the new phone number for that employee, and hitting forward all calls here. Once they felt comfortable, then it was just remove them out of the old phone system. So really for us, there was no downtime. We had significant downtime when we had our first attempt with our previous vendor. Many kind of trial and errors and troubleshooting processes where maybe not the whole phone system would be down, but 20 users would be down because of some unknown issue that we were running into.
Thank you. Now, this one I'm going to direct to Miles and Ricardo first, and then we'll hit Kent afterwards. But the question came from the audience. Does Synoptek and/or Cinch have any experience setting up the MS Teams VoIP system in a Citrix environment?
No, we haven't done it with Citrix. Boy, I'd love to learn more about the use case. But
Actually,
in my experience.
What was that, Chris?
So yeah, we use Citrix for all our exam rooms. We use Citrix for all our at-home workers, and they all use Teams in that Citrix environment. Great news is that Citrix has Teams offloaded directly from there. So so our thin clients that we have at people's houses or their personal workstations or whatever, handle that audio and route it outside of that Citrix environment, get it back to Microsoft, and the whole thing works extremely seamlessly.
And one other question that came in, and as a reminder to anyone in the audience, you can always put your questions in the questions box from the GoToWebinar control panel. But Kent, can you talk about, are there different options for voice enabling Teams? We talked a lot about direct routing, but are there other options?
Yeah, there's obviously direct routing, which was the Teams' first foray, and then now they've rolled out Operator Connect as well, where we again are a certified Operator Connect partner. So there's two flavors. Obviously, the Operator Connect piece ties in directly to the Microsoft tenants, and it kind of operates as a PBX in the cloud for them.
Fantastic. And just to round it out with Miles here, what else are you seeing in the markets? Similar issues in other industries. We talked a lot about healthcare here, which is important. You mentioned they use fax, which other industries use as well. But what kind of other verticals or industries are you seeing a real rise in moving over to Teams?
I mean, it really spans a lot of things. I mean, we work with a number of banking organizations. When I mentioned IVR before, they use that for people to do, touch tone banking. And then more broadly, though, Chris said perfectly, you don't know what you don't know. This really fits into a CIO, a director IT's vision and roadmap for application modernization and the overall experience. And so even if you're like, Chris has talked about like, hey, we wouldn't want to do this ourselves. We don't, it doesn't make sense. But some larger organizations may decide, but you still, if you're not an organization who has experience in what is possible here, let's kind of more broadly just with Teams, telephony, but across the board, then you want to really talk to an organization that does know about the art of the possible. It's a super app, and what can we integrate? Chatbots, automated surveys, sentiment analysis. I mean, really the sky's the limit, and then kind of having those discussions will really help set a strategy going forward.
Thanks, Miles. I think that's all the questions that we have. I want to thank all of you for your time, Chris especially. We really appreciate all the time you've given us. We appreciate your partnership, and I hope that this has been helpful for others with the same kind of situation. We will be sharing the recorded webinar with those that have registered and attended, and we'll also have it on our website eventually. In a couple of days, it'll be out there. So we appreciate it. If people have additional questions, you can go to our websites and reach out. We are happy to field those questions and help if you have any of these similar challenges. So, see if it's time for your own telecom rehab, and if so, reach out, and we're happy to help. Thank you all for your time, and thanks to everybody who attended.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.